All right, I don't want to keep you. It's been a long day. I really appreciate you coming to the CTO Advisor Hybrid Cloud virtual event. Thanks to Kedar, all the speakers, VFairs for helping us put on such an amazing event. We're going to talk cost optimization and the three different approaches to cost optimization. Our speaker, David Linthicum, from an earlier session, shared that IT's responsibility is to return value to the business. There's two ways in which IT can return values. One, via capability. We can accelerate the business. Whether we're talking about building an ERP system that enables better customer experience or digitally transforming an organization to work with our vendor ecosystems, or optimization of cost of these systems. In these one or two ways, we're returning value to the business. Today, we're going to talk about cost optimization and the three different options as I see them in the industry return value to the business by saving cost. Now, you may be arguing, Keith, just do all cloud. Cloud is the present and the future to infrastructure, and I will return back with cloud is a operating model, not a place. The whole point of this conference is to talk about adopting cloud-like capabilities without sacrificing cost and agility. Now, on paper, that sounds about right. But in practice, there's challenges. I'll refer back to some content that we did with a bunch of folks over the past few months, specifically David Linthicum, where we talked about repatriation and the challenges and opportunities with repatriation. We'll hit on a little bit of that today, but I highly recommend you go back and listen to that podcast via the website, https://thectoadvisor.com. I'm an engineer, sorry for the prefix. But at its core, no matter when you've created technology, it will always age. It will always become legacy technology. You will always incur technical debt, and there will be more efficient ways to deploy and implement technologies, no matter what your architecture is. So we're going to talk through these three different visions. One is optimizing in place wherever your cloud is at. If you're in the public cloud, optimizing in place in the public cloud, repatriation, or do you just take a hybrid cloud approach throughout your journey? Let's first talk about the argument for optimizing in place where you're in the public cloud. We'll do this via examples. Stories I've heard from the field and people taking their traditional applications, their traditional cloud apps, and modernizing them in place to optimize for cost. The first example I got is from SADA. I interviewed the CTO of SADA, Miles Ward, on the podcast, and one of the stories he shared is when he was working for the Obama campaign and he built out this massive infrastructure that had a bunch of load balancers, and the cost for load balancers themselves were in the tens of thousands. If he was to build that application today, he simply used Route 53 in AWS, which has that functionality built in, and he would save the tens of thousands of dollars from building load balancers. The key lesson is in this, while the price of individual cloud services may not be going down, cloud vendors are adding more and more capabilities to each one of their services. And as a result, it lightens the load on the customer side to rebuild some of these non-differentiating features. 10 years ago, I would not have said load balancers, it's non-differentiating. Today, load balancers are non-differentiating. So point number one, take advantage of the advancements in the cloud infrastructure. Point number 2 is to look at your patterns. I talked to a data protection company doing AWS reInvent, and their representatives shared with me how they looked at the data patterns of their product and their customers. There was like 100 to 1. They back up 100 times before they need to do a single restore. So if you look at that pattern of their data flows, they're typically ingesting data versus recovering data, and they adjusted the tiers of storage. Instead of having their storage sitting on S3, they migrate data after a day or two, which is when it's most likely for restore to occur, back to tape based backup in AWS. So Glacier storage, they're using Glacier storage. You might think, oh, Keith, Glacier storage is so expensive to restore, and a data protection company using Glacier seems like the most inefficient thing to do. Well, if you have this pattern where you're only getting 1 or 2 restore requests a day, and most of that is for data that has been deleted within the past day or two, this pattern of putting data in Glacier becomes super economical. And you can, and according to this data protection company, reduce your storage costs by 2/3 or more. An amazing cost savings without needing to repatriate all of that data to a co-location. Pay-as-you-go versus reservations. Again, optimizing for cost in place, looking at commitments and pre-committing your spend to a cloud provider. If you prepay, you will get breaks. So that's point number 3. Prepay for commitments. You see all of these articles talking about companies committing $500,000, $1 billion to the cloud providers. This is their way of hedging cost. We did it in the data center by buying excess capacity of servers up front, and then we could control demand based on our capacity. This is no difference. You're prepaying for the amount of capacity you believe you can control for, not that you'll use, but that you can control for. Prepay versus pay-as-you-go. The 4th area is to understand your SLAs. Do you really need a always-on VM SLA for a VM instance that doesn't have that service level agreement, aka a web server for a intranet? If the intranet web server can go down, why would I pay $129 a month or $300 or $500 a month to have that VM always available when I can use spot instances, and if the VM goes down, I restart another one? I can create an AWS autoscale rule that says that there needs to be at least one of these VMs running, and every time it fails, it restarts it into another spot instance. Easy way to save up to 90% of cost on a single VM instance. Then we can get into re-architecting the platform. These other examples were cost-saving hacks. The other option is to just completely re-platform the application, rebuild the application to be container or microservices centric, moving it to VMs, to containers and microservices, or even starting all over and building the application based on serverless technologies. We had a really great podcast with this then CTO of New York Times that talked through that motion of adopting serverless technologies. Now let's talk about the other argument, the argument for repatriation. First, let's define repatriation. There's some confusion in the market. I'm saying anything that's not public cloud is repatriating your workload. If I'm not running IaaS in AWS, Azure, GCP, OCI, IBM, we're talking about repatriation. So this is Equinix, QTS, TierPoint, all these co-location providers. I could be consuming bare metal in their data center. I could be hosting racks in there. Or I can go as far as building a data center, sticks and bricks, power and cooling, and managing the physical real estate again. All of that falls into the category of repatriation as I'm defining it. So let's talk about the workloads that are not great for cloud. Non-stop applications. One of my favorite to pick on is SAP. I can't really stop and start ECC. It is going to be a monolithic application that runs all the time. When I scale it by adding more VMs, not more containers that I can add and remove, but adding more VMs. That process is not seamless. I can't simply put a load balancer or a rule, auto scaling rule, in front of ECC, which is the main module for SAP, and say add more ECC app nodes. Once I add them, I very rarely subtract them. So this is a very heavy monolithic application that scales for the greatest domain, the greatest demand for the app. That's just not a cloud-friendly application. While there's applications or subsets of the application or environments I can use in public cloud, such as dev and QA, which I can double up, bring down, bring up, that might be appealing in the public cloud, but production is rarely appealing from a cost perspective in the public cloud. I bring those workloads back on-prem. Some of these mission critical apps alone could justify the cost of moving into a colo and providing connectivity up to the public cloud. A note about latency. When we move those applications from the public cloud back on-prem or on-prem to the public cloud, latency sensitive applications, what we call bolt-ons, typically have to come with those applications as well. Predictable demand. We get to a point where we know the app, no matter the architecture. Every December, we're going to scale up to 1,000 nodes, and for the rest of the year, we're at 500 nodes. There's some debate here. You could build for the high demand, or you can build your overall data center resources to flex up to that demand, or you may determine that the cloud is the best model for it. We'll get into this option in the hybrid cloud again, but there's this idea that if you have the capacity in your private data center and you understand a workload's demand, and you don't need the elasticity of the public cloud, it's probably best to move that workload back to the cloud, back to the private data center. What happens when you have a mature API? Let's talk about the process to the maturing API. There becomes a point where you don't need the innovation of the cloud for a specific business process. The development of applications has just settled. You don't have developers actively adding new features. You mainly move into bug fix and security updates, and you don't need the latest and greatest APIs. This is stuff that we can easily recreate in the data center using Kubernetes. My favorite buzzword, Kubernetes, to recreate that interface into the data center. I think we're at a point to say that it's comfortable that VMware, OpenShift, all of the major vendors have provided the basic building blocks for you to move cloud-like workloads back into the data center that don't need elasticity. What happens when we have known network patterns or network patterns that are so expensive that we need to consider egress. If you're at the point where you need to consider egress, SD-WAN has moved so far to the future when it comes to controlling latency and relying on the public internet for primary connections that you can have tremendous savings by re-architecting your applications to put these apps into the private data center and have them ride over SDN to save tens of $1,000s a month on egress. Again, something that easily covers the cost of a couple of racks into a colo location and a few 10 gig internet links. All right, last option and best option. All roads lead to hybrid. It's the premise of this conference. I don't care if you're all in the public cloud or if you're all in the data center. At the end of the day, you're going to find that your environment stretches between private cloud-like capability, this repatriation slide that we had earlier up, and public cloud agility. You're going to need a mix of both. Most organizations don't just simply cut off innovation. They still need to innovate. The public cloud is the best place to innovate. The private data center or the private data center model is the best place to optimize for cost. What does this look like practically? Let's look at even the all public cloud model. I did not understand, and I have to give VMware and AWS, IBM, and providers credit. I did not understand the model of having VMware Cloud in AWS. Why would I rent bare metal servers to lease vSphere capability? Well, if I want to outsource that low-level work, but I want the economics of scale of VMs and oversubscribing my infrastructure, AWS, VMC on AWS is a best of both worlds type of mixture. Yeah, I'm going to spend close to $200,000 a year, but if I take that SAP application and put it onto a vSphere cluster in my public cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, OCI, I'm going to have some pretty appealing economies of scale when I put this back on a environment that I can oversubscribe and I'm familiar with managing. Now, there may be some questions around licensing. You can deal with SAP and your software providers about that, but it's undeniable that when I'm putting VDI workloads, these workloads that always need to be onto these types of hypervisors that are bare metal in public cloud, I get the advantage of being in the public cloud, and I also have the advantage of someone else managing the rack stack and care and feeding of the hypervisor and bare metal layer. The other model is that more traditional model where I have private data center, whether it's colo or own assets, connected up to the public cloud, and this idea of cloud bursting. Again, I am finally at a point where I'm comfortable to say that Kubernetes and the architecture and infrastructure is there, that cloud bursting is real. I'm seeing this in the field. Specifically, Walmart shared how they're using their triplet platform, in-house platform for managing multiple cloud instances to handle cloud bursting. A lot of it is manual. Let's not get it too far ahead of ourselves. This isn't magical Kubernetes picking the best place to run something. A lot of this, to Walmart's submission, is still manual. But when you're talking about cost optimization, you can get some serious advantages for having colo and a couple of racks running on some Kubernetes clusters, some orchestration on top of that, that handles the management of infrastructure between public and private cloud. David Lithican talked about this during his presentation earlier today. My ending point in this short message is that hybrid cloud is where we're going to end up, whether you try to or not. 5 years from now, that Kubernetes-based applications that you build today will be looked upon as legacy, as a hybrid motion. It may not be simply about VMs, but these concerns around network costs, storage optimization, higher level services around load balancing. These types of optimizations are going to continue to present themselves over the next few years. The one thing that I can promise about technology, it's going to keep moving and it's going to keep getting efficient. We may not have Moore's law on the processor side anymore, but we definitely have it on the data center capability and cloud capability side of this. We're going to keep marching forward, and you're going to need to find a way to train your staff to always be thinking, how do I optimize for both agility and cost? You want to learn more? Visit the webpage. We've had a ton of conversations that go into these topics in detail, from Rob Hirschfield at Racking. The CTO of 6 Feet Up just shared about his build versus SaaS decision for building an events platform. The list goes on and on. Example after example how hybrid cloud is the future. Thanks for tuning in to my session. Love to continue the conversation in the chat. It will be open for a good half an hour or more. Have at it. You think I'm wrong? I can probably see the comments right now. You think I'm right? I love to have my bias reinforced. Tell me that I'm right. Hope you enjoyed the last session today with Katina talking about project management. It is a must attend. It's well edited, probably the best edited video of all the videos, but more importantly, it is a skill that all IT enterprise architects and managers should have.